In this podcast episode, investigative journalist and best-selling author Annie Jacobsen discusses the complex and often secretive world of biological warfare, government preparedness, and the stark realities behind these threats. She explores the nature of biological weapons, the challenges in public health responses, government contingency plans, including a classified program called Devolution, and the implications of biotechnology advances. The conversation touches on comparisons to nuclear war scenarios, the rise of biosecurity concerns, and the impact of transparency and trust in government communication during health crises. The episode begins with a reflection on the wide reach of podcasts, exemplified by a story where a hotel manager in the Italian Alps recognized Annie from her show and books. This sets the tone for the conversation's broader impact and the universal relevance of dialogue on serious topics like biological threats, which connect people from diverse backgrounds. Annie Jacobsen introduces herself as a Pulitzer Prize finalist and author of several best-selling books uncovering secretive aspects of U.S. government programs, with titles covering Area 51, nuclear war, and now biological warfare. Her work focuses on investigative storytelling that pulls back the curtain on complex defense and security issues. The discussion briefly touches on tensions involving Iran's nuclear ambitions and the complexities surrounding war threats. Annie notes that while Iran does not currently have nuclear weapons, the threat is often used as justification for military considerations. She emphasizes her primary interest lies in the distinct and more devastating scenario of actual nuclear or biological war, rather than political posturing. Annie connects recent public health scares, including Legionnaire's disease outbreaks and tick-borne illnesses like alpha-gal syndrome, to the broader theme of biological threats. She argues for the importance of understanding the basics of biology and epidemiology to avoid panic and politicization, emphasizing that biological incidents can be accidents or attacks. This grounding in factual information helps manage fear amid emerging outbreaks. Drawing from her previous work on nuclear war, Annie contrasts the timelines and experiences of nuclear versus biological weapon scenarios. Nuclear war unfolds rapidly, within roughly 72 minutes from launch to nuclear winter, while biological warfare could trigger anarchy within just 6 days due to rapid contagion and societal collapse. She highlights how fear of infection could unravel social order more viscerally than the immediate impact of nuclear explosions. Annie explains the 3 critical components to understand in any biological incident: how the pathogen transmits, how deadly it is, and whether effective medical countermeasures exist. Using examples such as COVID-19's 1% fatality rate and the flu's, she stresses the significance of airborne pathogens as the deadliest threats. The podcast discusses the importance of these fundamentals for public understanding and decision-making in crises. The conversation recalls the early missteps in public communication during COVID-19, particularly the CDC and WHO's initial denial that COVID was airborne. Annie stresses that admitting uncertainty is vital to maintaining trust, criticizing the hesitation of authorities to admit errors. This miscommunication led to widespread mistrust, undermining effective responses. Annie raises concerns about genetic data privacy, referencing DNA testing companies like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, and the potential for genetic information to be exploited in weaponized biological agents. She discusses the possibility of race or DNA-specific bioweapons, a topic confirmed as plausible by experts, with ongoing speculation about foreign state programs, such as those in China. The episode highlights the dual-use dilemma, where scientific advances designed for beneficial medical purposes can also be weaponized for biological warfare. Annie traces genetic engineering's origins from the 1970s and talks about how gain-of-function research can enhance pathogen transmissibility and virulence, exacerbating threats while simultaneously being aimed at medical countermeasures. Biological weapons are illegal under the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, but Annie reveals the sobering reality that the Soviet Union violated this treaty with a massive secret bioweapons program considered a Manhattan Project for bioagents. Their goal was to wipe out populations while leaving infrastructure intact and to cause death in more horrifying indirect ways, like triggering fatal diseases through treatment itself. Despite illegality, state-level biological warfare programs persist as confirmed or suspected in nations like Russia, China, and North Korea. The podcast explores how these developments raise the bar for the threat, with the lower cost, ease of concealment, and rapid development making bioweapons a unique and growing danger compared to nuclear arms. Annie discusses specific pathogens of concern that could be weaponized, such as plague, anthrax, Ebola, and hantavirus. She explains differences in transmission and lethality, noting that while diseases like Ebola have devastating fatality rates, they are not airborne under normal circumstances. The potential of genetically engineered airborne Ebola or plague variants poses terrifying possibilities. The interview highlights significant gaps in American preparedness for a catastrophic biological event. Annie uses the example of Los Angeles, where emergency services are already overwhelmed daily. Ciprofloxacin stocks are limited and unevenly distributed, and coordination often fails. Public distrust, bureaucratic complexity, and infrastructure fragility compound these challenges. Annie unveils the existence of a classified government program known as Devolution, designed to maintain government continuity in the aftermath of catastrophic breakdowns, including biological war. Devolution involves relocating designated individuals to secure sites, hot sites, warm sites, and cold sites, to rebuild governance after societal collapse. The criteria, selection process, and lists of officials involved remain classified, but reportedly cover key governmental and judicial roles. Drawing on declassified war games and expert testimony, Annie describes how fear and desperation during a rapid-spreading deadly biological event could unleash widespread insurrection and breakdown of social order. She quotes Senator Tom Daschle on the inevitability of people doing inhuman things to survive, underscoring the grim nature of biological warfare beyond physical death to societal disintegration. The military's role in response to a biological incident includes logistical support for delivering countermeasures and enforcing order. Upon a declared insurrection act, the military may supersede civilian law enforcement as the U.S. becomes a legal war theater with shoot-to-kill policies. Mask and gas mask distribution becomes critical, and strategic prioritization of critical infrastructure enforcement further complicates civil-military dynamics. Annie compares likely behaviors under a biological crisis to observed reactions during natural disasters like hurricanes, where panic buying, hoarding, and gridlock emerge rapidly. The podcast discusses how government emergency agencies such as FEMA suffer from bureaucratic inefficiencies and lack the professionalism of military responders, often delaying or complicating effective crisis management. A recurring theme is the erosion of public trust due to government secrecy, miscommunication, and reluctance to admit mistakes, such as around COVID-19. Annie advocates replacing the label conspiracy theory with speculative narrative to allow more open dialogue and admit uncertainties. She emphasizes that transparency is essential to effective crisis management and public cooperation. Annie recounts incidents such as an explosion in Russia's vector laboratory and the Wuhan lab COVID outbreak controversy. These underscore the risks of accidents even in civilian defensive labs and the challenges of global biosecurity oversight. The proliferation of biosafety level 3 and 4 labs worldwide, including 17 BSL-4 labs in the U.S. alone, intensifies potential dangers, as many have inadequate safety standards. Effective diagnostics and rapid medical responses are crucial to combat biological threats. Annie explains the development of medical countermeasures, such as antibiotics for plague or ZMapp for Ebola, and the importance of early detection. However, she highlights gaps, such as the homeless population, whose data and symptoms often go untracked, leading to vulnerable blind spots in disease surveillance. The podcast wrestles with the complex ethical issues surrounding gain-of-function research, gene editing, and biotechnologies that could both prevent and facilitate bioattacks. Debate continues on whether these technologies should be restricted or used aggressively to develop defenses, given the low barriers for adversaries to exploit them. Annie reveals that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, operates with an annual budget twice that of the Defense Department and oversees key agencies such as the CDC, FDA, and NIH. HHS is designated as the lead agency in biological incidents, but Annie expresses skepticism about their capacity to manage large-scale biological crises, favoring greater military involvement. The conversation addresses quarantine enforcement challenges and the dire consequences of failing to contain a fast-moving airborne pathogen, including military-imposed quarantines, restrictions on movement, and the potential for violent resistance. The escalation of government powers through laws such as the Insurrection Act raises difficult civil liberties concerns amid crisis. COVID-19 is analyzed as a real-world wake-up call, exposing weaknesses in testing, messaging, supply chains, and government public relations. While not the deadliest pathogen, it revealed how rapidly a novel virus can spread worldwide and how slow or inadequate responses amplify damage. The episode stresses the necessity of learning from COVID without politicizing or spreading fear. The episode includes an overview of the 1946 Baker nuclear test at Bikini Atoll, highlighting the origins of understanding nuclear fallout and the personal toll on those involved in early atomic weapons development. Annie's interviews with veterans offer insight into Cold War mentality and motivation shaping U.S. defense strategies. Annie concludes that while governments have extensively prepared internally for biological war, including classified continuity plans and defense measures, the public remains largely uninformed and unprepared. The episode repeatedly urges awareness, open communication, and informed public dialogue as critical to preventing or mitigating future catastrophic biological events.